Welcome to this Module 1 online training session for Pearson Edexcel International GCSE Art and Design. We'll be covering a lot of information today, but don't worry if you miss anything, as the presentations for both modules will be available on the website after all the courses have been delivered. There will also be links to useful documents on the website in the presentation. Jacqueline Veet, our subject advisor for art, design and media, will be on hand in the chat to answer any questions you may have throughout the presentation. Aims and objectives of Module 1. Module 1 is designed to help you gain an understanding of how the qualification is devised and how to understand the content of the qualification. We hope that you will appreciate the significance of planning courses across all titles offered in this qualification, and that an understanding of the marking criteria will give you confidence in identifying the characteristics of each mark band. Centres are encouraged to understand the requirements for submitting students' work before assessment and how to plan and deliver meaningful, broad-based themes. In recognising the assessment criteria for this specification, delegates will be able to support students in their selection of work. Studying the guidelines of the specification document is an essential requirement for teachers in order to successfully comply with the expectations of the qualification. Later in the presentation, I will identify the support available from Pearson. Before we focus on the qualification, I would like to welcome those delegates who are working with Pearson for the first time, and teachers wanting to refamiliarize themselves with the key parts of the qualification. Our mission is to help people make progress in their lives through learning, because we believe that learning opens up opportunities, creating fulfilling careers and better lives. Our qualifications and assessments help to educate millions of people worldwide. We provide textbooks, curriculum materials, multimedia learning tools, IT platforms, and professional development. At the core of everything we do is the desire to make a measurable impact on improving people's lives through learning. Introduction to our International GCSE Art and Design qualification. To start, I will run through an overview of the qualification. Our International GCSE in Art and Design is made up of 5 endorsed titles: Fine Art, Graphic Communication, Photography, 3-dimensional Design, and Textile Design. Each title is comprised of 2 components, each with a 50% weighting and a total of 72 marks available for each component. Students must work in the same title for each component. For component 1, it is the personal portfolio. It is the centre's responsibility to devise a theme for students to work on. For component 2, the externally set assignment, the theme is set by Pearson and released on the website on January the 2nd each year. As part of component 2, the externally set assignment or exam, students will complete their supporting studies before using the 10-hour period of sustained focus to work on their personal outcome or outcomes. Component 1, personal portfolio. Students create a personal portfolio of work in response to a theme or themes internally set by the centre. Centres are free to devise any themes, projects or tasks appropriate to their students and resources. Themes, projects or tasks may each have a separate focus or be interconnected. Students' work must comprise supporting studies and personal response or responses. Students must submit only one project for assessment. The work submitted should evidence all 4 assessment objectives and exemplify a full line of inquiry or creative journey. Teachers can aid students in selecting the best project. The project or projects must give students the opportunity to show their ability to construct a sustained line of inquiry which is coherent, relevant, substantiated, and logically structured. All knowledge, skills, understanding, and activities should therefore be relevant to the student's creative journey. The work undertaken for this component should be seen as part of a substantive project, rather than a series of disjointed tasks, and should evidence all the assessment objectives holistically. We don't impose a set number of projects that students produce during the course. Centres may set as many projects as they wish, but at the end of the course, in consultation with their teacher, students must select one project to submit for assessment. The link to the Essential Guide to Component 1 is in the slide. Component 2, externally set assignment or exam. Students will produce and present a personal response or responses to the externally set theme. The component 2 ESA is comprised of two parts. Supporting studies based on the given theme prepare students to produce their final outcome or outcomes during the 10-hour sustained focus period. The 10-hour period of sustained focus can be completed over multiple sessions under formal exam conditions. Students will use this time to create their personal response or responses in relation to their supporting studies and the given theme. Students' work should evidence all 4 assessment objectives in a holistic and integrated way. The externally set assignment represents the culmination of all the international GCSE course, as it allows students to draw together the knowledge, understanding and skills they have developed throughout Component 1. The preparatory period of study can be a good time to organise an enrichment opportunity. For example, a gallery visit, workshop, or visit to a local area of interest could support students' responses to the externally set theme and inspire some interesting ideas. Although students should be given access to their own supporting studies during the timed sessions, they're not permitted to add to or alter them, and centres must ensure that no additional work is brought into or out of the timed sessions. Component 2, Part 1, Supporting Studies. Students can be given the exam paper as soon as it is released on the website on the 2nd of January. The intention of the preparatory study period is to allow students to begin their response to the theme in a personal and creative way, developing, refining, and recording their ideas towards the final outcome. The preparatory study period has no set time period. It is the responsibility of the centre and teacher to determine an appropriate amount of time to allow students to complete sufficient supporting studies in order to prepare them for the 10-hour sustained focus period. At the end of the preparatory study period, students will begin their 10-hour period of sustained focus to work on their final outcome. Once the period of sustained focus begins, all work on supporting studies must stop. The supporting studies are an essential part of the Component 2 submission and must be submitted for assessment alongside the final outcome or outcomes. Component 2, the 10-hour sustained focus period. Once the supporting studies are complete, students must not have access to this work except during the timed sessions. Work must be stored securely between each session. The 10-hour period of sustained focus must be completed under supervised, formal exam conditions and may take place over multiple sessions, a maximum of 4 sessions within 3 consecutive weeks. Students must use their exam sessions to produce a final outcome in response to their supporting studies and set theme. Students must work unaided during these sessions. Teachers are only permitted to assist with technical issues, for example, issues with the workspace or equipment. As soon as the 10-hour period of sustained focus is complete, students must submit their work for formal assessment and must not be able to access the submitted work. There is a link to the GCSE Administrative Support Guide at the top of this slide, where you'll find more information about this. For this qualification, both components are externally marked, meaning that no internal assessment is required. Work for all candidates must be submitted for assessment. All work is submitted for assessment via our online assessment platform, Learner Work Transfer, which is accessible via Edexcel Online. For each component, students can submit either images of the 3 A2 sheets of supporting studies and images of the 1 A2 sheet of the final outcome or outcomes, or a PowerPoint containing no more than 20 slides. If submitting a PowerPoint presentation, digital portfolios should be in chronological order, so the sequence of development can be followed by the examiner. Centres should refer to the digital submission guidance in the Administrative Support Guide, shared with you on the previous slide and at the top of this slide too. Both are equally suitable submission options. All submissions must also include authentication forms signed by the teacher and the candidate for both components. Now we'll go on to understanding the International GCSE Art and Design qualification. During this section, we will take a closer look at each of the 5 endorsed titles: Fine Art, Graphic Communication, Photography, Three-Dimensional Design, and Textile Design. Students must work in the same endorsed title for both components, but students can be entered for more than one title in any examination session. Each endorsed title will be awarded a separate international GCSE qualification. The areas of study for fine art are drawing, lens and light-based media, mixed media, printing, painting, and sculpture. Students are not limited to just one area of study. However, centres should be reminded that students are required to have adequate time to fully develop their knowledge, understanding, skills, and techniques within a chosen area of study. Fine art work will demonstrate an understanding and application of the formal elements and creative skills, including mark making. Students should use visual communication sensitively and thoughtfully to document their artistic journey and fully support their intentions. For further information about any of the listed areas of study, please refer to the specification using the link in this slide. The areas of study for graphic communication are advertising and communication, design for print, drawing and illustration, interactive design, multimedia, package design, signage, and typography. Students should conduct primary and secondary investigations during their design development and explore traditional and/or new technologies. Students have the option to use digital or non-digital processes. The areas of study for photography are documentary photography, photojournalism, studio photography, location photography, experimental photography, and moving image. With the development of new lens-based technologies, Students should attempt to use photographic mediums to explore and create a body of work, which develops and refines both the process and the concept. The areas of study for textile design are constructed textiles, digital textiles, dyed fabrics, printed fabrics, fashion design, soft furnishings, and stitched and/or embellished textiles. Textile design is a versatile practice that involves the creation, selection, manipulation, and application of a range of materials such as fibers, yarns, and fabrics, and processes such as weaving, knitting, stitching, and printing to create designs and products. The areas of study for three-dimensional design are architectural design, interior design, product design, environment and landscape design, sculpture, design for theatre, film and television, jewellery, and body adornment and ceramics. Three-dimensional design is concerned with the designing, prototyping, modelling or making of functional and aesthetic consumer products, interiors and architecture. Students should engage with appropriate processes, materials, and construction techniques using maquettes, models, and working drawings to help take their initial ideas through to outcomes. Drawing is at the heart of art and design and forms a core element of the practice of artists, craftspeople, and designers. It is a requirement for international GCSE in art and design for students to submit evidence of drawing. Drawing in the context of this international GCSE is taken to mean recording the observed world using mark making in appropriate media, exploring ideas visually through the act of mark making, investigating through the exploration of drawing media to find new ways of expressing ideas, feelings, or observations, experimenting with various tools, materials, and techniques. Drawing can form part of a student's submission for any of the assessment objectives and forms part of the foundation skills found in all art qualifications. It is possible to evidence drawing in all 5 titles, and more details can be found in the specification and in our new drawing guide on the website. The link to this is at the top of this slide. In this slide, you can see drawing with textile materials, such as fabric dye and stitching. Drawing to produce graphic outcomes like the book cover and portrait. Drawing to research from observation and digital media in three-dimensional design. And drawing with light using both traditional and digital processes photography. And drawing to record observations and develop ideas in a wide range of media for fine art. Annotation. Written annotation is not required in this qualification, but when included in support of the visual language, it can contribute towards all assessment objectives. Writing is not in any way a replacement for the practical work, and the annotations made, if any, should be relevant and informed, using specialist language and not merely descriptive. For examples of how annotation could be used effectively, please see our bite-sized videos on YouTube, which explains annotation in relation to each assessment objective. Please use the link in the slide. This is a good example of where annotation has been used in a purposeful and meaningful way, but it isn't the focus of the submission. Where possible, visual evidence should be used to demonstrate the 4 assessment objectives, but annotation is useful when explaining an idea, process, or technique that isn't obvious to the examiner. Annotation should not be used to fill gaps, but serve as a source of information to support visual language. Annotation need not be lengthy, but should be relevant and informative. In this example, the candidate explains a concept that would not have been obvious to the examiner. I experimented with oil paint. The dark and cool colour scheme represent misery and depression, while the contrasting light being exposed from the keyhole symbolises hope that lies behind the shut door. We will now look at how you may deliver the course.
Lindsay, is it possible to pause and maybe go through some questions first? Is that okay?
Yes,
a couple
of course.
That would be
of
good
course.
if I addressed verbally. So a few people have asked about the structuring of the 10-hour period of supervised focus, or otherwise often referred to as the exam, and how to structure that. Now, in terms of the 10 hours, that's free for the center to timetable in any way that fits their context and their learners, as long as it's a maximum of 4 sessions within 3 weeks. Now, that could be 2 5-hour days, which is how I used to run it when I was teaching in my center. That could be split into smaller sections. Also, if you have students who have special needs or need access arrangements, often in a practical subject like this, they wouldn't necessarily have to have a special application for extra time or anything, because it is flexibly delivered. And you're able to tailor what media techniques and processes they explore based on their individual needs. So for some of my students who had really high level physical difficulties, I would do it in much smaller chunks than the rest of the cohort, and I would timetable that slightly separately. So for example, I had one student who would come in at the start of the first session. She could only do maybe an hour or two, maybe 3 hours max. And she would just let me know whenever she needed to pause, and then we would just pause that time until the next scheduled session, and she would resume her time, and I would just keep track of that. If you have a student who needs complex needs and needs to sit the 10 hours separately from the rest of the cohort, that is absolutely fine. There's lots of flexibility built into that so that you can really tailor that 10-hour period of sustained focus, as well as the preparatory studies around each of those individual needs for the students. When you're thinking about the timing of when to schedule that 10 hours, you need to think about the deadlines for submitting all of the work. So the 20 slides or 4 A2 sheets per component need to be uploaded to the online platform by the 31st of May. So as long as you sit that 10 hours prior to that in good time that you're able to upload all of that work, then you really can have that date whenever you prefer. Some people prefer to have it sooner. Bearing in mind, Lindsay said, as she said, we can only work on component 2 preparatory studies until that 10 hours starts. And then once that 10 hours starts, they cannot work on the component 2 work outside of those sessions or after those sessions. So some centers prefer to have it a little bit earlier, and then they might work a little bit on component 1 and wrapping that up afterwards. Some centers like to use the full window from January until April or May to do their preparatory studies for component 2. They've already resolved component 1 prior to that, so they have the exam as late as they can so that they can just submit the work straight away by the 31st of May. That is completely up to your center and what works best for your context and your learners. So hopefully that helps a little bit around the exam. I also see people have put there that can the teacher invigilate? Yes, because it's in exam conditions. It's not actually exam. It's a period of sustained focus, but it's in exam conditions. And the administrative support guide that Lindsay linked on the previous slides goes through what that means and how that looks, as well as the specification. And the teacher does need to be there as the specialist to support. Now, sometimes you could have extra external invigilators join. I used to get one external invigilator when I would do my 10-hour with my students, as well as have my technician on hand, just because it gave that flexibility that if I did need to pop out of the room with a student, say to go to the printer, or if more than one student needed technical support, my technician was also on hand, and she would float between the different rooms that we had the exams on in, so that she would be able to support the teachers that were invigilating. But you need that specialist there to give that technical support. And then I would always have an external invigilator, because my school preferred to have one independent person that was available just to make sure that those exam conditions were followed by the teachers. But that very much depends on your center's strategy for that period of sustained focus and what they prefer. But yes, it can be completely invigilated just by the teacher. It is helpful to have more than one staff member on hand, though, or an external invigilator to kind of relieve that. And then a few more things have come in as well. Sorry, there's a lot's come in while I was talking, so let me just get my bearings and make sure I address all these questions before we move on to the next section. Should students include written reflections at the end of the PowerPoint or just finish with the final piece? Now, I think that goes along with the annotation and the purpose of annotation. For component 1, they can obviously write an evaluation at any point that they wanted to, but I always remind centers and students to think about the value of whatever that evaluation is. Is it adding to the visual language that's being presented in the artwork? If it is, then it is a valuable annotation. Like on the escape slide that Lindsay showed us, we wouldn't have known that that light coming through the keyhole symbolized hope, and that the colors purposely were chosen were around that somber mood and sadness. So anything that adds to the visual language is worth including. If it's adding nothing to the visual language, then I wouldn't include it. In fact, often that space would be better used for another piece of visual work that shows the development and refinement of their ideas in their work. For component 2, if they want to write a final evaluation, it has to be done during that 10 hours, because you cannot work on component 2 outside of those sessions. And again, I would always say to my students, whenever we got to that 10 hours, if you think it's going to add value to your project, then you need to make sure that you do that in the 10 hours, but it's not required and it is not necessary. And it depends on the learner. It might be better for them to spend that time on the practical work and making sure that they're fully realizing their intentions and completing that sustained line of inquiry that is running through component 2. So again, and evaluations are very much dependent on the learner. Some students can express themselves in purely visual means, whereas others have a more of a hybrid approach between critical and analytical written word that supports the visual work. So it's very much dependent on the learner about whether that annotation is necessary or even adds value to the work, if that helps. I've seen some questions come up as well around the exemplars. So we have a new exemplar library, which Lindsay will show you at the end. We recently added brand new fine art exemplars with written commentaries to that page. And I just messaged the assessment lead during this training event, and she's confirmed that the additional titles that have been already selected and just going through final quality assurance and vetting, which sometimes these processes take longer than you expect, that they'll be up there if she's finishing that this week. So that's really good news. So for the start of next term, and when I do my next subject advisor update, I will make sure to link to those as well. But so make sure you sign up those. Again, the link will be at the end of these slides to sign up to my updates. So around those exemplars, and that's going to be slide submissions as well as physical submissions and a range of the titles, not just fine art. Fine art is predominantly the highest number of entries that we have, but there is growth in the other endorsed titles, which is why we're trying to make sure that we get some good exemplars for you guys to use. Now, like I wrote in the chat, the standard is the same across all of the titles. So a mark of 58 in fine art is the same as a mark of 58 in textiles, in graphics, in photography. So that standard stays the same for all titles and every assessment series. So you can look at exemplar of fine art and look for the performance level descriptors, the performance band descriptors within that, regardless of the media techniques and processes used. You can still see evidence of that development of ideas, that refining and experimenting, their recording of their ideas, and then realizing their intentions. And that those 4 assessment objectives are the same. So you can see that no matter which media techniques or approaches that is used within the portfolio. That said, it is also really nice to see what other students are doing within that title to get ideas as well. So that's why we're trying to make sure we keep adding to that exemplar library so you can get a wide range of titles. And as the entries are growing in those endorsed titles, we have more work available that we can then share as exemplars. So we're going to have a new lot added by next week, and then we'll continue to add each assessment series each year as we get more and more examples in the different titles to share with you. Sorry, Lindsay, there's a few more questions that have come in.
I think it's great that you're doing this. Thank you so much.
And I apologize, I've got a cold, so if it's hard to understand me, sorry. In terms of submission, Google Slides, somebody asked, is Google Slides okay? Yes, that's absolutely fine. You can easily save them to PDF, but you can use some people use Canva, PowerPoint, slides, anything that you want, and it can easily be converted into a PDF and uploaded. We talked about the exams. Somebody just wanted to ask about the exemplars from Escape. Lindsay, are you able to talk around that exemplar a little bit more about why they received the mark that they did, or is that something better for me to?
We're doing in module 2 tomorrow, we'll be going through several samples of whole candidate submissions with the mark breakdown, so that the marks will be explained in detail about why the candidate got the mark for that piece of work.
Perfect. So
that's
I think
tomorrow.
Today mostly about the delivery and the administration and logistics.
Yeah.
And then tomorrow we'll get more clarity on the marks
exactly
of the exemplars. Perfect. So that will be answered in tomorrow's session. And just so you know, these recordings will be available on our YouTube new YouTube playlist, which is linked at the end, and we'll show you where to get to these. I'll try and get the recordings up by next week, as long as I get a copy of them sent to me quite quickly. That way we're starting to put them on there because it's a lot easier to access them all in one playlist rather than going through the Pearson Professional Development Academy for all of the recordings. So if you aren't able to attend tomorrow, there will be a recording available for you to watch. Sorry, there's a couple more. Answered that. I think I've answered, 25, that was the other one. 25% extra time was asked about, and that comes up a lot in the UK qualification as well. 25% extra time is often an access arrangement that is awarded or given to students that have cognitive processing, reading and writing speed issues, which wouldn't be applicable to a practical exam. And in the JCQ guidance, from which we also base the international GCSE on, because we are trying to make it as equal to the UK regulated qualification as possible. The JCQ guidelines and the regulatory guidance says that practical time subjects, such as those in performing and expressive arts, wouldn't be eligible for 25% extra time, because the reason why they were given that excess arrangement doesn't apply to that type of an assessment. And so because you're able to break that into those smaller sections, if they do have physical barriers, you don't have to have that long sustained period of 5 hours straight with just breaks. They can break it into smaller sections. And if they are a bit slower in terms of their speed, then I would make sure that they're developing preparatory studies and outcomes that match their needs and their style as an artist. So I wouldn't then start getting them to do a giant A1 or A2 painting as their outcome. It might be better that they're working with media and techniques and processes that enhance and highlight their strengths within their individual needs. and they're able to kind of tailor that to what is appropriate to their processes. So that's why the 25% extra time doesn't apply, because it's not about a cognitive processing assessment. When it comes to the slow processing speeds and physical disabilities, I also recommend making sure that whatever approaches they are using works to their strengths. So it's about finding for each individual student what those strengths are, and that's what they're showcasing. There's no set quantity of work. Yes, there's a maximum of 4 A2 boards or 20 slides, but you don't have to use that full maximum. And you can show a student's performance through a very concise portfolio as well. So they wouldn't be affected because of their individual needs. And I don't know, Lindsay, if you can answer this one. Are students allowed to arrange the prep studies on the A2 after the 10-hour exam period, such as cutting and sticking it for submission, not adding anything to the artwork?
No, the work has all got to be handed in at the end of that 10-hour sustained period of focus, and then locked securely until obviously then it's uploaded for assessment onto the learner work transfer.
Okay. So they should make sure their preparatory studies are mounted, if they're using the A2 sheets, mounted prior to the 10 hours. And then anything they complete in the 10 hours, can that be stuck on after, at the end of the 10 hours?
Yes. So all they have to do is then fix their outcome onto the final sheet, onto the A4 sheet, A2 sheet, sorry. Yeah.
A2, yeah. Or slides if they choose.
Or slides, yeah, exactly.
And then can a center decide which of the 5 topics they offer? Absolutely, Nancy. You can do just one, you can do more than one. If they do more than one title, they count as different qualifications for the student. So I often had students doing, when I was teaching, both fine art and textiles, or graphic. I also did graphics and photography. So they can have more than one. And it's not like the UK qualification where there's discount codes, which I won't get into because that's not relevant. So yes, so they can take more than one. And maybe Lindsay, you can answer this one. What support can be given to help students format the PowerPoints? Can a teacher make templates to give the students where they insert their images?
I would imagine so, because that's like technical support, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we always recommend starting with a blank template. So, because you don't want to guide that process too much, because the creative process is very divergent and organic. And where students sometimes get lower marks than they expect is when they have a very formulaic approach. It's about allowing that genuine investigation and letting their ideas direct the flow of their project. So rather than trying to say, right here, we're going to do artist research, we're going to copy that artist research, we're going to do 3 experiments, we're going to draw 2 ideas, and we're going to do an outcome, that becomes stifling to creativity. So if you are making them a template, I would make sure that it's a very open-ended and blank template that they're starting with. And also, the other thing my students used to love to do is decorate their slides. They do not need to include any decoration. It's all about the content. It's not about how pretty they look. It's about what artwork and visual language and ideas they're expressing.
It's also important to have the slides in chronological order, so the examiner will be able to see very clearly the creative journey from the start to the end.
Yes, and we expect that creative journey is not necessarily linear, is it? It goes and it follows that natural tangential process where they might be inspired by something and then go into a different direction. And that's good to show that snapshot of that journey, making sure that they have a fully sustained line of inquiry represented within their slides. And it might be for component 1 that they do a lot more development work, maybe more than one project, but it's about choosing that best project, that best picture of that one sustained line of inquiry to present for assessment. So for component 1, you could have as much or as little work as you want your students to explore, as long as one project is submitted. Yes, Google Slides are okay to use. Somebody else asked that. clay work, it will take, this might be really good for you to answer, Lindsay. One of my students is doing clay work. It will take 72 hours to dry, and she can't do this before. How would that be managed with the 10 hours?
The once the item, the creation has been completed within the 10 hours, then obviously the firing and everything else is not included in that making. If they have to do the glazing, I think all the instructions for this is in our specification, where there's a link to in this presentation, which will give you information on clay work and firing and timings. And it will be, it's very clearly set out in there. And maybe at the end, Jacqueline, you could show them how to access these documents.
Yes, I'll do that at the end. It's also worth noting that sometimes when you're working with there are certain things that fall under not included in the 10 hours.
Yeah, like
So,
firing, for example.
Yeah, but if, say, they needed to do something to the clay after it's dried, what I would do for my students is they would make the clay, then we would resume the 10 hours once it was dried, because we didn't fire the clay, they painted our clay whenever we did it, because our kiln didn't work.
Yes, so the actual time the student is working on the piece is counted as part of the 10 hours.
Yes. And then another option is that they don't have to necessarily make the clay in the 10 hours if they're doing something else to it. So when I was doing clay masks with my year 11s, they actually made the masks prior to the exam, and then they did follow-on work to create that into a final outcome as a wider piece of artwork in the 10 hours. It's very flexible, and it very much depends on what the project is and what they do. But only thing that what counts in the 10 hours is what the student is actually working on. So that drawing time wouldn't take up the 10 hours.
Exactly. Yeah.
So quick question on that. So it was my student. We obviously an online school, so we don't have a kiln or anything. So she's working with an air dry clay, and the package says 72 hours. She's creating a sculpture, so she needs to do that in the 10 hours. And then she wants it to dry, and she's going to work onto the dry clay after that. So that needs to be done in the 10 hours too. Will I have to set up a separate session for her to complete that second part?
Probably if your other ones are too close together for her, you can have a separate session. And that's what's nice about the 10 hours. You can be flexible for your cohort. You can have separate sessions for different students depending on what they're working on.
Yeah.
Okay, Fab, thanks.
Is the invigilator teacher allowed to be on a computer during the 10 hours? I'm not quite sure what that's in reference to. The students can't access the internet during the 10 hours. They can use the computer to work on using software, or say they're working on photography to work on editing of their photographs, but there's no access to the internet. If you mean just while they're invigilating, they could be on their computer and they're not actually sharing that with the students, I'm guessing that would be okay, Lindsay?
Yes, as long as the teacher examiner is in the room and they are supervising in formal exam conditions, it doesn't matter whether they read a book or they're on their computer.
Yeah,
as long as they're supervising.
I used to have my computer open because I had a software on my computer so that I could see what was happening on the computer screens in my room for my students doing graphics. So yeah, that should be okay to have a teacher having the computer. And when we send both components digitally as 20 slides, who will be marking them? Is it the same examiner marking both, or a different examiner for each component? And if it's just one examiner marking our school, is their marking moderated and checked by the team leader or senior examiner? And correct me if I'm wrong, Lindsay, it's the same examiner that marks both components for the center.
That's correct.
And there's really tight quality assurance processes where they have to give samples, and they get checked by team leaders who get checked by principals. And there's a lot of checks and balances, and we're continuing to always improve that process as well, especially as the numbers are growing. We've got our standardization training coming up soon for examiners, and we're going to make sure that the range of different titles are shared. And it's a long, very in-depth process when it comes to the quality assurance. And then obviously after, the results, there's that access to review of marking and appeals as well, which is all built into that quality assurance process. The training on YouTube, really helpful for us to not be able to join. Great, I'm glad that that's helpful. You'll also see the other training events that I ran. I ran one on component 2 earlier this month, if you're interested in seeing that one, especially because it's quite relevant to this project right now. And the network events are always for IG, A-level, and GCSE. So any of the training on that training list label as a network event is pertinent to this qualification, as well as the A-level and the GCSE. And Sarah, you said, could you send a link to that detail? Could you just confirm which detail you would like a link to? And I'll make sure I get that in the chat whenever Lindsay resumes. And I'll also put the YouTube links. They're all on the end slide, but I'll pop them in the chat if that's helpful as well. Right, I think, Lindsay, if you want to go ahead and resume, and then I'll just have a look through the rest of these and make sure that we get them all covered in the next little pause and Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. That was really helpful. Okay, we will now look at how you may deliver the course. The International GCSE Art and Design qualification is a 120 guided learning hours course of study. You will have the option of delivering the 120 guided learning hours over 1, 2, or 3 years, but we do not recommend delivering this qualification in fewer than the recommended 120 guided learning hours. Induction period. If time allows, it could be beneficial to build an induction period into your course. Students get the chance to start developing the knowledge, understanding, and skills that would underpin the rest of the course, including opportunities for mark making and recording written observations, without the pressure of producing work for external assessment. Enrichment opportunities. This could be cultural visits or workshops. It can be beneficial, inspiring, and motivational for students to visit relevant places of interest, for example, art galleries or interesting cultural locations. Component 1 theme or themes. Teachers could refer to past exam themes to provide starting points for projects or tasks, or they could devise their own. Mock exam. It can be hugely beneficial for students to have the opportunity to do a mock exam, not least because it gives them a chance to practice planning and producing a personal response in 10 hours under examination conditions. Preparatory study period for component 2. This can commence from the release of the exam paper on the 2nd of January, and it should conclude when the sustained 10-hour period commences. Revisiting component 1. Your students may benefit from the opportunity to revisit their component 1 work after they have completed the externally set assignment. That is entirely up to you, your students, and the time available to do this. Selecting work for submission. Your students should be encouraged to select work carefully for submission. You should reiterate to students that the quality of their work is the important factor, and be prepared to guide them in deselecting work that does not contribute anything to their assessment evidence as a whole. Work submitted should show convincing evidence of all 4 assessment objectives, evidence of working in appropriate area or areas of study, and evidence of a coherent journey with a sustained focus. Planning lessons. Having a structured lesson needs to take account of all the assessment objectives, and it may not be appropriate to have all students following an identical timeline. The course needs to have sufficient flexibility to tailor the course to their specific needs. For suggested approaches, please refer to the scheme of work available on our website using the link in the slide. We're now going to look at understanding the assessment. It is important that students understand each of the assessment objectives outlined in the specification and on the assessment grid. The assessment objectives help to direct students towards a pathway of development in their chosen area of study. You may use the link to the assessment grid in the slide. As you can see, each assessment objective is equally weighted with 25% allocated for each component. Due to the 50-50 weighting of each component, each assessment objective is worth 12.5% at component level overall. Assessment Objective 1. Develop ideas through investigations demonstrating critical understanding of sources. Assessment Objective 2. Refine work by exploring ideas, selecting and experimenting with appropriate media, materials, techniques, and processes. Assessment Objective 3. Record ideas, observations, and insights relevant to intentions as work progresses. Assessment Objective 4. Present a personal and meaningful response that realizes intentions and demonstrates understanding of visual language. Using the taxonomy. When assessing work for each component, examiners will make a holistic judgment using the descriptors in the taxonomy. And this establishes which mark band matches most closely the visual characteristics of the candidate's work. Candidates' work that falls between two mark bands must achieve all the keyword descriptors in the lower band and some in the band above. Where this happens, examiners will use their professional judgment to decide which mark band is most appropriate using a best fit approach. After a mark band has been established, the next stage is to use the assessment grid to decide a mark within that mark band. Please note the link to the taxonomy in the slide. After looking at the visual characteristics of the work holistically, a mark band is decided using these descriptors that best exemplify the work in the taxonomy. For example, the examiner could select mark band 4, competent and consistent, as the work is informed, purposeful, sustained, and skillful. Examiners would then refer to the assessment grid to fine-tune their mark decisions. Examiners will use this assessment grid to assess all student work for both components and all titles. The 4 assessment objectives are in the first column, with performance descriptors running across the top of the grid. The levels of performance head the 6 remaining columns, and the 6 mark bands each contain 3 marks. There is a maximum of 18 marks available for each assessment objective. Mark band 1, limited ability. Insufficient knowledge, understanding, and skills, minimal evidence and a lack of structure in the development and recording of ideas. Mark band 2, basic ability. Some knowledge, understanding, and skills demonstrated, but they are simplistic and deliberate. Some structure and repetition in the development and recording of ideas. Mark band 3, emerging competent ability. Knowledge, understanding, and skills are generally adequate but safe. Mark band 4, competent and consistent ability. Knowledge, understanding, and skills are secure and cohesive throughout. Mark band 5, confident and assured ability. Knowledge, understanding, and skills are effective and focused throughout. Mark band 6, exceptional ability. Knowledge, understanding, and skills are in-depth, perceptive, and accomplished throughout. Examiners mark each component separately and decide whether the evidence just meets, mostly meets, or fully meets the descriptors in the mark band to determine the appropriate mark within that band. Where evidence for an assessment objective meets descriptors from 2 or more bands, a best fit approach is used to award the mark that corresponds most closely to the descriptors that have been met. A mark out of 18 is awarded for each assessment objective and then added together for a total mark out of 72. Examiners will also refer to the published visual standards to compare how the candidate's visual evidence and marks compare to the standard. Centres may also find the visual exemplars available on the website helpful in planning your course and making assessment decisions to feed back to students. We have a new exemplar library, which is very helpful as you can select a specific mark band to see a range of marks and titles. I will be showing you a slide of this later in the presentation. I will be also showing examples of student work with marks for each assessment objective in Module 2 tomorrow. This slide summarises the points I have just made and includes a link to the assessment grid. Here is our homepage showing the new exemplar library created to make access to our exemplar materials more accessible and easy to find. They are organised in a gallery view by performance band and component to assist you with internal assessment. Please use the link in the slide. For further support, please use these links to email the art and design team to discuss any further questions. You can also book a catch-up with our subject advisor, Jacqueline, and read the latest subject advisor updates. I recommend signing up for these monthly updates using the link on this slide to get the updates sent directly to your email. There are art and design communities available to join to discuss ideas with other teachers. In addition, you can sign up for future training on the Pearson Professional Development Academy and watch previously recorded training events on the Art and Design Training and Network Events YouTube playlist. Thank you to Jacqueline, our Art and Design Subject Advisor, who's been answering your questions today, and I'm sure she'll be continuing to do this after my presentation is complete. As this presentation will be shared with you, you don't need to copy the contact details now. And as Jacqueline said, this will be on our YouTube. I would just like to explain what we're going to do in Module 2 tomorrow. We're going to be trying to understand for you the assessment objectives is qualification and to explore the idea of broad-based themes. We're going to try to understand the marking criteria that examiners use and how to improve performance in your centres. There will be lots of visual images tomorrow for you to look at with mark breakdowns for different components and for different assessment objectives. We'll also be identifying the support available from Pearson. Thank you very much for attending this course today, and please remember to fill in your evaluation forms. All feedback is very useful to us.